Boys Abyss and I have a complicated relationship. Like that of a mother and her third child. Morally speaking, I should give little Andre here the same amount of love I do my other boys, Axton and Jet. But I'm so tired of parenting after the first two, so he can figure himself out while I drink excessively, smoke a lot, and blame him for the divorce.
When a piece of media is defined as a tragedy, it's safe to assume, spoiler alert, tragedy unfolds. Now dwell on that incredibly profound and thought-provoking statement for a minute because I want to ask you, when you think about the structure of a tragic story, at what point in the plot does that element of tragedy rear its head? Perhaps nearing the third act of a story, so that its sudden appearance acts as the catalyst for the narrative's newfound direction. Or maybe it's at the very beginning of the story, as we follow the steps to its inevitable conclusion, we manage to gain something positive as a direct result of the tragedy, or the many things garnered when going through it. Perhaps it's introduced solely at the end of the story to either subvert expectations, or because the writer just fucking gave up.
Point being, when readers are presented a tragedy, they more or less understand the conventions and what they're in for. But then I ask, what happens when you make the entirety, from start to finish, of your story a tragedy? What happens when 17.5 out of 18 of your manga are drowned in that concept? What happens when you have a story where characters go through trials and tribulations only to have no reward or resolution to those problems? Well, ladies and gentlemen, you get one of the most aggravating manga I have ever read, and boy howdy, I could not put it down.
I say 17.5 because the very first half of Boys Abyss' first volume paints a pretty stock standard melodrama set in a Silent Hill-like town. A high school boy named Reggie lives here tied to it because his friends, his family, and his views of his own future seemingly lead him to this very town. His only real love for what lies outside this realm being a pop idol named Aoi Nagi, who suddenly, by an insignificant chance equal to that of, I don't know, dogs reading? Hey, yo, what? Nah, that's not real. Happens to be found on her work break behind the convenience store Reggie frequents. What then follows is a strong and open conversation between the two, from Reggie talking about his tough living conditions with a dysfunctional family and lack of self-worth, to Aoi talking about her aimless life now that she isn't a pop idol anymore. The two relate to one another, their despair being what seemingly binds them. Their talk eventually leading them to the middle of a bridge where they look upon the cold black water. The silence suddenly broken by a question Nagi poses, which will forever shift the rest of the story into an inescapable tragedy.
Say, Reiji, wanna commit suicide together?
That's right, it's one of those kinds of manga. What can I say? I'm a sucker for the sad and the sorrowful, the surreal and stressful, the suckering and the succotash. This manga has little to no happiness to be found within it, which is kind of strange, ironically, for a melodramatic tragedy. Usually worlds born of sorrow have some kind of positivity to them, but that positivity quite literally ends there. It's like half the volume.
Going forward, smiles are empty, the comedy and lightheartedness seemingly fading into nostalgia. Usually characters grow and develop from the darkness they are faced with and are rewarded with a placement in the light.
Take one of my all-time favorite examples of this, Fear and Hunger. A game that well and truly breaks you down, giving you anal bleeding, making you cut off your own limbs, making you sacrifice kids, you get the point. It's cruel and vile, but as you play, you grow as a player. You get to learn the world a bit more. Every time you make a mistake, you learn from it. Despite what you're given, you fight. You grow. Oh, and you also get to have sex with a bunch of people in bunny masks, so that's pretty good.
What you would expect from stories like these are characters finding a means to combat the traumas present in their own lives and come out as stronger and more open people. But Boys Abyss doesn't really do that, and because it doesn't, the long and grueling read to come becomes tougher and more exhausting with each weekly chapter. The series refuses to pause, flooding the reader with problem after problem, rendering its characters' breathing room and development to the size of, well, my penis. non-existent. Because of this lack of growth and storyline tangents, it became a manga many, and I mean many people began to drop. You see, when you create a story filled with flawed characters, or with intense, seemingly inconsolable trauma, and you have them cater to their flaws in every conceivable way, you are going to have a very divisive audience. Boys Abyss is a manga built on that principle. It pertains to a cast where all are guilty of something and refuse to tackle that very something. Everyone is clueless, unable to truly understand the situations in front of them, but quick to assume what is truly happening. Everyone is damaged, carrying a burden that well and truly ties them down, preventing them from making any real progress in their own lives. Characters make frustrating decisions. They spiral, losing what little progress they made. And this happens over and over and over again.
Boys Abyss was a manga that only recently finished and only recently came to its conclusion. And while there are many things to dislike about it, from pretty loose plot threads to character developments and motivations not quite making sense, to random detours in the plot and to this bitch. Don't get me started.
I know she's hot, okay? I get it, but you can't fix her. Please just take my word for it. If I have to explain why, this video will not be monetizable. The story and what it represents and explores is what grabbed my attention with every chapter. Despite the aimless nature of the story, which I still consider one of its flaws, it's also the key weapon to this manga that's sometimes used in a really raw and honest way. Not only do you not know exactly where the story intends on heading despite the preconceptions of the tragedy genre, but it's also able to explore that aimlessness, and in that exploration, there is a level of realism to be desired. That emptiness seemingly filling the everyday reality of an existence being challenged by the mistakes they have made in their past, and even more profoundly, the mistakes they continue to make in their everyday existence. What I found to be the most captivating aspect of this read is how gross and shitty it made me feel. Seeing spreads like this, where characters feel trapped in a space they are familiar with, yet at the same time, so very lost in it as well. These kinds of images just really stuck with me. Now look, I'll be upfront. I can't say I love this manga, but I can't say I hated it. I enjoyed it, but I also disliked it. If anything, it's like a solid, I don't know, 7.5 out of 10. Not exactly a manga I would go my way to talk about, but this just so happens to be the timeline in which it gets its own video. This is not quite a recommendation, but I'm also keeping this semi-spoiler free, so if you choose to read it, you can. There may be something in this for you after all, so I'll try to keep it vague. But I will have to spoil certain moments, and I may allude to things, so a spoiler warning is advised, and I'll do so going forward. Oh, and a trigger warning too, but I mean, you saw the intro, right? So like, obviously. So why? Why make a video on a manga that I didn't love? Well, that's because, while I didn't love it, others absolutely hated it. As when news broke out of its final chapter's release date, this was the response from viewers who are familiar with this read.
We won't be missing it.
Trash.
Trainwreck is ending, finally.
This manga is hot garbage.
This manga
I'm
is
surprised
fucking
it's still going.
I'm so grateful for this
Man,
dumpster
I'm so
fire.
glad I dropped that series.
Some thinking this manga was shit, others thinking this manga was the shit. Others were like, it's neither the shit or shit, but just kinda like, meh.
Readers believing that the first few volumes of this series is something special, only for them to get tired week after week from what this manga tried to pull. In the eyes of the audience, Boys Abyss overstayed its welcome. And to be honest, I kinda get it.
For a story that felt genuine with characters tied down by their own personal struggles and using the inability to leave the city as a means to convey it, you figure you're in for an honest tale about growing up with horrible mental health. But it very quickly becomes something different. Rather than everyone's problems being tied to their own insecurities and trauma, it quickly morphs into everyone's issues being portrayed as if they are only really happening because of their interactions with Reiji and everyone blood related to him. The book treats its main character like an abyss, a dark pool of black that aims to be filled, unintentionally dragging others down into its depths. While the expression of one person's depression being something that forces them down, as well as how their depression can also affect other people based on how they choose to combat it, are really profound and intense ideas that absolutely should be explored, the author doesn't really convey that clearly, as each character that interacts with Reggie was already pretty fucked up beforehand.
You could make the argument that because these people have the mental fortitude of IKEA furniture, that's the reason why Reggie's able to kind of suck them into his abyss. But the problem stems from the fact that these issues only come to light when they interact with Reiji.
They aren't shown to be broken people until they are directly intertwined with Reiji and his experiences. While his despair does bring people together, the people being brought aren't inherently good people. And that is what I believe causes this series to flip-flop in the manner that it does. Every character consistently relies on its main, but the main character himself is really unreliable, meaning nothing is well and truly achieved.
None of these characters try to do things at their own benefit. They don't try to fix their own problems, nor do they actively seek out help from other people. They instead kind of just tear each other apart. And that's part of why I think this is one of the most tiring and aggravating reads I've had, but goddamn, what a ride this is.
The town of Boys Abyss is truly one that feels ethereal and distant. Despite it being a normal looking country town, its residents are anything but. While they have the option to leave at any moment, they find themselves never really able to. It's not as if this place has some kind of curse preventing their escape. The route is always there, but those who leave it always find themselves returning to it at some point. Like a moth to a flame, they are consistently drawn to it. In truth, this town is their home. No matter how far away they travel, this was their beginning. This was their despair, and no matter what happens, it always will be. What's so fascinating about this setting is how it's used as a means to convey people's entrapments to their past mistakes. The town is being consistently ridiculed and lamented by those who wish to escape it, yet the town itself never falters to people's comments. The town, much like their past, is unchanging. It's always going to be there, no matter how much these characters and even ourselves wish it weren't. Letting go of the past is an incredibly hard feat, especially when that past has impacted other people. While the past doesn't dictate who you are, or you have to let go of the past, you're not that person anymore, are comforting statements, they can just as easily feel delusional. We all grow and change, but the mistakes we make in our past will always be there. To some, we view it as vital parts of our inevitable change, but to others, these can be considered chains. And to me, it's the latter. But those chains don't look like this, they instead look like this. Outside of having an awesome hairstyle and charming smile, the similarities between this little kitten and myself end there. This mini fella is a warm and earnest guy, with dreams of making people smile and laugh through his own little internet videos. Who wants to be brave and stand up for people, who wants to inspire people and become someone who helps others. Except that was the delusion this boy tried to trick himself into believing.
The reason why I started this channel all those years ago wasn't because of some grand ambition to make people happy and have them smile and laugh at what I'm creating. That's a flat out lie. I started this channel because I wanted a girlfriend. Yeah, that's it.
The point being, when I was 14, I made videos because I thought it would increase my social reputation and allow me a chance into a world I didn't think was available to me. Wanting to be brave and stand up for people, incredibly untrue because my past self was far too afraid to even be associated with argumentative conflict. He'd see bullying happen right in front of his eyes, but he'd be too afraid to make any attempts to stop it. And sometimes, even he was playing the part of the bully itself.
Okay, look, to say I didn't get into any physical confrontation would be a lie. I did get into fights in primary school. But in my defense, Beyblading is serious business, and if you cheat, well, you're part of the reason why I think we should bring back the death penalty.
Fact of the matter is, our past doesn't bind us. Just because these were the beliefs I had at the time doesn't mean I still subscribe to them. But sometimes it's hard to live with the fact that we had those beliefs or we did those things. We make mistakes. We say things we wish we didn't. We did things we wish we didn't. We believed things we wish we didn't. But all you can do is accept what is and grow.
I'm also aware that my examples are very mundane in the grand scheme of things, but this is already a pretty heavy kind of topic, so I thought I'd lighten the mood with my stupid shits and gigs from when I was younger.
This, however, is the story of people who can't look beyond their circumstances and past, but it's instead the story of people who well and truly reach their boiling point. Everyone in this town has a history that they themselves cannot seem to escape, all with varying levels of seriousness and weight, yet all of them erupting in an equally distressing and horrible manner. That inevitable build-up is what's so gripping about this series. You can forever cut the tension with a knife, but you never know which of these characters is holding the blade. Rather than this being a story of people tackling their trauma and depression head on, or utilizing people as a means to combat it, this story ignores that pathway and instead trods down the route of pure emotional instability. The core reason, it's important to showcase why pent-up emotions are a person's worst enemy. Now look, I'm no psychologist, I'm an Aussie dude with no bitches and a media arts degree, so my opinion is as relevant as, I don't know, fucking eggs? Though in my ventures with bad mental health, I found one of the best ways to fight against it is having a support and honest social network who are willing to hear me out and offer simply their time, as well as spending that negative energy on something creative and worthwhile. Others might say they need a change of pace, from traveling across the world to partaking in something new. Everybody has their own ways of fighting against it, but there are those who don't know what's needed, and this is the story of those kinds of people. These people are deliberately written to be self-destructive, from those who fear speaking up will only burden others, to those who have no way of understanding what it is they truly need, to those who even after erupting feel they aren't being heard or being supported. When that eruption finally comes to fruition, it's spoken in a way that isn't really beneficial to anyone. Each character is unable to articulate how they truly feel, and as a result, the communication is ineffective each time. These characters are too afraid to be vulnerable, too afraid to be open, and those who are, abuse that openness in a way that only truly benefits them. I think this depiction of despair is Boys Abyss at its absolute best. We all have internal struggles, some of which we find too tiring or unexplainable to talk to others about. Myself definitely included, which sounds insane considering how goddamn well off I am. And yet, these are the kinds of thoughts I have from time to time. I hate being alone, but at the same time, people are fucking exhausting. I hate how much time I dream of being better, rather than actively making steps to be better. I hate how easy it is for me to be led by the decisions of other people, than it is for me to make decisions for myself.
Had it not been for Boys Abyss, I wouldn't have been able to contextualize these emotions properly. And I say that because when flicking through its pages and going through some of these characters and their arcs, I was getting mad because I could see myself in some of these people. That does not excuse the bad writing though, like, oh my god.
Let me give you an example. Spoiler alert, but basically this guy's name is Gen, and Homeboy has some serious trauma. Without giving too much of it away, he's friends with Reiji since they were little, and has a huge crush on Reiji's mother, as she was there for him when his own parents weren't. That crush does grow sinister over time, where whatever she says is final. He consistently finds himself complying with her demands. Reggie keeps talking about leaving the town, and then Gen is like, no, don't do that, let me handle everything. But it turns out the reason why he's trying to convince Reggie not to leave the town is because, well, he's actually in love with him, I guess. Cool, but wait, because he's still actually in love with Reiji's mother. Haha, just kidding, because how could you not realize that he actually wants to be Reiji's mother? Why? Fuck you, that's why. But then it turns out he just wants to die with Reiji because everybody in this fucking manga for some reason wants to. People treat my boy here like Moist Critical treats metaphors, like a fucking fleshlight. From completely left field, this motivation arises. There isn't even a pinch of foreshadowing. Okay, except maybe this singular frame where he is completely covered in Reiji's mother's clothing, except he's not there because he wanted to try on her clothes, but to instead have sex with her. But he's also traumatized by her and what she's done to him all these years. So then I ask, why would you want to be like her then? And look, you could make the argument that this is the result of trauma and abuse, in that Gen being a victim of it isn't aware of it. In that perhaps Gen is trying to become her in order to no longer be the victim of his own story and be able to save and protect Reiji. Except he's aware of how shitty she is, and he could just do that as a good friend, which he isn't, despite the author trying to tell me that he is.
Okay, look, I'm not using this video as a means to just shit on Ryu Minanami's work, right? I like Boys Abyss. There are things I don't like about it, but I do like it as a whole. I also just don't think there's anything to be gained from just shitting on a mangaka's work because you don't happen to like it. You can critique art, but you don't have to just shit on somebody's hard work because this takes a lot of time to make. And you know, art is subjective and I think they did a really good job. But it's because I like Boys Abyss, I feel the need to point out aspects of it I really didn't like.
Art is subject to criticism, and in order to talk about my absolute favorite moment and message within this entire series, I do feel the need to talk about the major glaring problem I and many people had with this manga. Boys Abyss is a weekly Young Jump manga that first started airing in 2020. It gained popularity at the time due to its intense subject matter and genuinely beautiful art. Being part of Young Jump as opposed to Shonen Jump, you naturally expected stories of a more adult nature. Around that time, new additions to the magazine included the likes of Garnsey, Chojin X, and Gunjo Senki, all prominent at the time, all of which were action-orientated. Boys Abyss being the only new dark melodrama in the 2020 editions pool for Young Jump, in a way gave itself a spotlight. People loved it, and with its continued publishing, more and more people were hearing of it and reading it for themselves. Even selling out its first 4 volumes early on in its debut almost 4 years ago. But gradually over time, it began to fade in obscurity. Readers began to realise the snowball effect in motion. They noticed the events present within the book were only really getting worse before they were getting any better. Boys Abyss would continually pull at straws, trying to keep its weekly readers on their toes by introducing tangents that aimed to complicate the circumstances of its characters in a way the mangaka themselves thought it to be interesting. But in reality, those tangents were at the detriment of the manga's pace. Those tangents even outright at times betraying the character setups themselves. Boys Abyss is an easier read when its entirety has been published. I for one only jumped in on it about 3 months ago, and was able to read it back to back within a few days, which is likely why I genuinely enjoyed it. But to readers who had to wait, week after week, those curveballs the story consistently threw weren't being caught, but they were instead being dodged. Boys Abyss overtested the patience of its readers. There were a few who stuck by the series till the bitter end, many of whom seemingly just wanting to know where their borrowed time would eventually lead them. But with each chapter coming out, their faith in the series began to waver as Minenami-sensei continued to do everything they could to make this complicated web of circumstances interesting, but people grew tired, and I think even Minenami-sensei was growing tired themselves.
Putting out a chapter every week for 4 consecutive years is a inhuman task. It takes a lot of grit and effort that we readers will never truly understand. Spending hours upon hours every day trying to get the art right and trying to contextualize your thoughts to manga is a really profound and incredible feat that should not be denounced. Ryu Minenami is one of the most hardworking and diligent mangaka in the contemporary sphere, and I think in a weird way, the roughness that is what happens to Boys Abyss is kind of testament to that fact.
Boys Abyss was quickly becoming tiresome nearing its end, people outright celebrating its inevitable conclusion, but those who were sticking to it were hopeful that perhaps it's in the ending that the message of this entire series would become clear. Perhaps there was something to be gained through the slog of suffering that was this series. And then the ending came, and well, people had thoughts. And while I don't speak for everyone, perhaps my reaction may help paint a picture.
What? But Reggie, never spoke to her. I guess we just have to assume that they did, but why? What about the break? I don't understand. Oh, that's it? Oh, that's it. What?
Boys Abyss comes to an end in a way that feels disingenuous. The last few chapters seemingly trying to speedrun into an ending that feels out of place. Its ending, while not the culmination of the entire series, still felt like a kick in the gut. It's as if there was nothing to be learned, nothing to be gained by the end of it. It's not that art with an interpretive meaning is useless. Personally, I adore art that lets you sit back and reflect on its contents. But Boys Abyss tells you its ending, but its ending doesn't really have much to say.
If that's all there is to Boys Abyss, then why make a video like this in the first place talking about it? Why animate over 200 panels? It's because Boys Abyss made me feel things. It made me feel angry. It made me feel annoyed. It made me feel anxious, and unintentionally, it made me laugh, a lot. But above all else, man, it made me reflect, and when art makes you do that, goddamn, is an experience worth talking about. I think it's finally time I talk to you about my favorite moment and message from this entire manga. Spoiler warning ahead.
Sakuga Akiyama, also known as Chako, is a major side character in the story of Boys Abyss. She is cute and excitable in the presence of the boy she loves, but is, deep down, depressed, damaged, and even envious of those surrounding her. From body dysmorphia combined with an internal craving for attention, Chako lives her life in a really painful way. Constantly overthinking and even going out of her way to spy on people for information that's beneficial to her. Her consistently declining mental health causes her to be both self-destructive and explosive in other people's personal matters. She is the embodiment of envy, envious of Nagi for being physically beautiful and seemingly the only person Reiji looks at. Envious of Gen for having a closeness with Reggie that she can't seem to attain for herself. Envious of Reggie for being the object of everyone's desires. But above all else, she is envious of the main characters in a novel written by her favourite author, Esamori-sensei. Their book focuses on the story of two people who commit together in a place called Lover's Lake. She is envious that the two protagonists were able to make a choice of their own whilst together as one, that they were able to die together in a way of their own choosing. She was envious of the fact that they could do what she could not. She was envious of the fact that they could be the protagonists of their own story. Chako is a lonely existence who lived with an abusive and strict family. She is the byproduct of parents who refused to listen to her, and the byproduct of a child infatuated with adult media that pertains to escapism. She is a disillusioned girl with no dreams of her own, except to die with the boy she loves. Their attempt is thankfully interrupted by an ex-girlfriend of the very author Chako is obsessed with. Their talk is frigid, an adult trying their best to explain to a young teenage girl that their life isn't something to be thrown away, no matter how insignificant they feel it is. This ex-girlfriend states that the book Chako loves does refer to a real relationship its author Esamori had, but it's not the one with her. She states she is never seen or mentioned in the book at all, as if Esamori was only truly in love with the girl written in the book. Chako knows this, and states it's precisely why she wants to die, because in doing so she won't be forgotten. She won't be some side character like the lady in question. She can be the protagonist for once. She can be heard. She can make others feel the hurt she has felt. But once, Chako can be the heroine of her own story. The woman proclaims that she and Chako were similar, that she too wanted to be made into the main character by everyone around her. She too was envious of people. She suffered and suffered, her childhood truly awful. But she fought, and fought. When she was at her lowest, she stood back up. No matter how painful, she survived. She became the hero of her own story. Because in actuality, nobody can make you the protagonist of your own life. The only person who can is you. Boys Abyss teaches us a lesson we tend to forget. You may feel insignificant in the grand scheme of the universe. You may not feel like you truly belong. You may feel inadequate compared to others, or even like a side character in your own story. But your story is your own. You are its author, and your audience, comprised of those who love and cherish you, want it to be long and worthwhile. You deserve that chance. You deserve to feel like you matter. Your story is not over, so
live. Grow up to be an adult. The future you, who knows your whole story, will make you the main character. So for now, live.
Then he tells me this is not the end.
I want to thank you all for watching. This was a weird video to make, especially considering my mixed views on Boys Abyss. Usually when I talk about manga, it's because I can wholeheartedly make a recommendation, but this one is different. It's a series I personally liked, but I know it's not for everyone. Though if you choose to give it a read, I can't help but encourage the purchase of a physical copy. It's a good way to celebrate the work of the mangaka herself for their consistent 4 years of work. Before I wrap up, I would once again like to thank my wonderful patron supporters. You guys are truly far too generous for what I deserve, and I hope my thanks in these videos attest to at least that. Seriously, you guys are supporting my pretty self-indulgent dream, and I genuinely appreciate that. I hope these videos give to you some kind of happiness that equates to that of your patronage, so thank you very much. You guys are the best. I also want to give a huge thanks to the following for their tier 4 support. Everybody please, join me in a round of applause for the following people. Mighty Dong, Lux Koa, Jake Regan, Sea of Clouds, Lantern Larry, Pigeon, and Why Do You Ask? Another awesome username, I must say. Thank you all so much for that additional financial support. Y'all are truly kissable, and I'm very, very thankful. With that, I'm out to work on my next depressing and despairing video that will emotionally eat me out. Y'all stay safe out there, and remember, I've been married a lot.